fossil fuel. The same agency also stated that the fossil fuel expansion on the continent contradicts global commitment under the 2015 Paris Agreement to curb greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide and to limit the rise in average global temperatures. According to Pope Francis, he argues that through fraternal love, the problems of climate change can be solved together. Only if we act together. And this has also been amplified in the principles of sustainable development. That is why in the next 1 hour or 1 hour, 30 minutes, together with our pool of experts who are here with us, and thank you once again, we will discuss and analyze the impacts of fossil fuel in Africa with a keen focus on the proposed East Africa Crude Oil Company in Tanzania and Uganda. I will be your host, moderator Jack Omondi from Don Bosco Tech Africa. Don Bosco Tech Africa is an organization that coordinates around 1 or 2 TVET centers in the sub-Saharan Africa. A bit of what is going to happen. If you are from an English-speaking country, don't worry. We have our translations on board. Please join the channel that is geared towards your language. And also, if you have any question, kindly put it in the chat. You can raise your hand if you have any question. At the end, we will really answer your question. We have a program that we're going to follow. And this program will really guide us on how we are going to go with the webinar. So kindly feel welcome and enjoy the program.
Ladies and gentlemen, we welcome you once again, and we would like to remind you that this webinar is being recorded, and we have various languages that you can select from. At the bottom of your screen, there is the interpretation sign. Choose for English speakers, you remain on this channel, and for the other speakers, Portuguese, Italian, Spanish, and French, you select your preferred language. Remember, for Italian, remember to choose Japanese. For reasons that Zoom can explain, we don't have it right now. But for Italian, remember to select Japanese. And for Polish speakers, remember to select Russian. Thank you so much, and do enjoy the session.
Welcome once again. We have our pool of experts that we have seen their pictures there. We are just going to have a word of prayer from Benedict Crew.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Laudate si, o mi Signora. We praise you for Brother Air and Mother Earth. We thank you for Mother Earth, rich and abundant in nutrients and minerals to sustain life on Earth through the growth of food. We thank you for the plants that grow in that earth, nurturing the soil and keeping it healthy for new seasons and giving us beauty, joy in their beauty. We thank you for the trees whose roots grow deep into that soil, taking and giving nutrients and minerals in harmony. These trees that also ensure that the air we breathe is alive and healthy. We repent today for the condition of Mother, Sister Earth, and Brother Air, for they are groaning in pain, critically ill and dying because of humanity's selfish greed to possess and their ongoing extraction of natural resources. We read from Laudate Si, verse 53. These situations that have caused Sister Earth, along with all the abandoned of our world, to cry out, pleading that we take another course. Never have we heard 200 years. Yet as we are called to be instruments of God our Father, so that our planet might be what he desired when he created it and corresponded with his plan for peace, beauty, and fullness. The problem is that we still lack the culture needed to confront this crisis. We lack leadership capable of striking out on new paths and meeting the needs of the present with concern for all and without prejudice towards upcoming generations. The establishment of a legal framework that can set clear boundaries and ensure the protection of ecosystems that has become indispensable. Otherwise, the new power structures based on the techno-economic paradigm may overwhelm not only our politics, but also freedom and justice. Father, we pray for humanity to pause and reflect, acknowledge the truth and repent. We pray for our new leadership to embrace ethical and moral approaches to preserve what is left of Mother Earth and Brother Air, and recreate the fullness and beauty of what God originally gave us without prejudicing future generations and preserving freedom and justice. We ask this in the name of the one who came to proclaim the good news to all creation, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Thank you very much for that wonderful prayer. Before I proceed, I also want to mention that we have my co-moderator, Ms. Lorraine, who will be sampling your questions on the charts. Let me introduce to you Father Benedict, Father Benedict Ayodi from GCCM, Global Catholic Climate Movement, who is a person who is very much, passionate about environmental conservation and also the implementation of Laudato Si. Father Ayodi, kindly welcome.
Thank you very much. And I also like to take this chance to welcome all of you at this webinar that is being conducted by the Global Catholic Climate Movement, the part of Africa. We are very delighted to host you and to talk about these very important issues. I'd like to share my screen. I hope you can see my screen there. Okay. So indeed, we are doing this webinar in the context of the season of creation. As many of you may know, the season that begins on 1st of September to 4th of October, when Christians all around the world are joined to take action, to take climate action. They pray and take action for creation. The Orthodox Church year starts on 1st of September with a commemoration of how God created the world. And on 4th of October, Catholics and other churches from the Western tradition commemorate the feast of St. Francis of Assisi, known to many as the author of the Canticle of Creatures and the patron of the patron saint of ecology. Now, in communion with the Patriarch of Constantinople, the Orthodox Church, the World Council of Churches, and Christians from all over the world, Pope Francis in 2015, lamenting the rate at which the natural world is misused as a result of human activities, ratified and announced that the Catholic Church will also mark September 1st as the World Day of Prayer for the care of our common home, which is celebrated until the 4th of October, the Feast of St. Francis. And in 2018, the Global Catholic Climate Movement coordinated with the Vatican to issue their first invitation to Catholics to celebrate the season of creation. Last year, 2019, Pope Francis made his first official statement promoting the season of creation and calling for Catholics and non-Catholics alike to care for creation. Monsignor Bruno Marie Dufay, Secretary of the Dicastery for Promoting Integral Human Development, on May 24th, 2020, issued a letter to invite the Catholics worldwide to participate in the season of creation. The letter strongly invites the Church to join the ecumenical family in celebrating the season of creation. Also, season of creation is celebrated by Christians of all traditions. So it's not just, Catholics. And so all tradition, Christians of all tradition and the leaders of faith tradition have encouraged the faithful to participate. So it has become an ecumenical event. Throughout the year, indeed, major Orthodox, Catholic, Protestant, and Anglican organizations and churches have joined to encourage the 2.2 billion Christians worldwide to pray and act on ecological issues. During the season of creation, Christians around the world rejoice together. We are called to honor the Creator by loving creation and each other. It is a time to slow down, really to slow down and focus on what matters. During this special time each year, we repair and restore our relationships with the other and with all creation, and indeed above all with God. This time for creation indeed offers, in the words of Pope Francis, individual believers and communities a fitting opportunity to reaffirm their personal vocation to be good stewards of creation. The season of creation is a time to renew our relationship with our Creator and all creation through celebration, conversion, and commitment. It is an annual ecumenical season where we pray and act together as Christian family for our common home. Each year, the Ecumenical Steering Committee, the steering committee of the season of creation suggests a theme, and the theme for this year, 2020, is the Jubilee for the Earth. This theme is taken from Leviticus chapter 25, verses 1 to 12. Jubilee indeed is a time to renounce over consumption and economic system based on constant economic growth at the cost of the earth and those who are poor. Jubilee indeed is a time when those who have consumed the most must make restitution to those who have suffered the most. Jubilee is a time of rest for the land from constant exploitation to restore ecosystems and people. On September 1st, Pope Francis issued a message for the World Day of Prayer for Creation, where he says, I am very pleased, like what here, I'm very pleased that the theme chosen by the ecumenical family for the celebration of the 2020 season of creation is Jubilee for the Earth, precisely in this year that marks the 15th anniversary of Earth Day. In the Holy Scriptures, a Jubilee is a sacred time to remember, to return, to rest, to restore, and rejoice. In addition, the Holy Father has released his prayer intention for the month of September and is calling all people, saying that the planet's resource will not be plundered. but shared in a just and respectful manner. So this year, among the crises that have shaken our world, we are awakened by the urgent need to heal our relationships with creation and with each other. During this year's season of creation, we enter a moment of healing and hope, a jubilee for the earth, which requires recognition of creation. And there are many activities that have been planned indeed to celebrate this season of creation in different places. We have ecumenical prayer services, integrity of creation, teams are included in Sunday sermons, and people are holding prayers and services. They organize creation walks, they hold ecumenical meetings and encourage sustainable living. They do many symbolic acts all over the world. Here in Africa, for example, and other places indeed, we'll be having, prayer to bless all animals. Bring all their different animals, if they have donkeys, their pets, whatever they have, we will be praying for those ones. And also we will be having inauguration of our reforestation project in a big forest, rainforest in western part of Kenya called the Kakamega Forest. If you can see in that picture, you can see the difference before and after, where a place called Nakuru in Kenya, where Christians, through prayer, devotion to our Mother Mary, they were able to transform the church area to what you can see, the picture there.
Yes, Father, I'm requesting you to kindly consider time. I hope
yes,
you are
I'm just about to conclude, and I'll speak a little bit about the divestment, which, as many of you know, we are promoting the global Catholic climate movement, and divestment is the opposite of investment, of course, and is one of the projects that we've been promoting throughout the world, that's calling upon Catholics and non-Catholics alike to divest from fossil fuels. If we'll have more time later, we'll speak in detail about this, and I thank you all. God bless you.
Thank you, Father, for that wonderful presentation. And what I took out of your presentation, what stood out for me was that the season of creation is not for the Christians alone. It is for the Christians and non-Christians. And this is revealed in the principle of leaving no one behind. So I'm very happy that in this season of creation, we are reminded to renew our relationship, not only with our Creator, but also with the natural environment. I'm going to introduce the first panelist, that is our first panelist is Thuli Brilliance Makama, and as you see from the name, Thuli Brilliance Makama is the Senior Advisor to Oil Change International in the African region, providing strategic direction and campaign for the organization in Africa. She also worked closely with the civil society organization and other stakeholders in the African region to shift energy finance towards clean energy access and to expose the impacts of fossil fuel projects. She is also a trained lawyer with experience in advocating for public participation, especially in the environmental decision-making and also in the economic development projects. In 2010, she was awarded the Green Nobel, a prestigious Goldman Environmental Prize. Prior to founding the Environmental Law Center, she was the director of the environmental justice organization called Friends of the Earth in Swaziland. Karibu in Kiswahili. Thuli Brilliance, welcome for this occasion to present on the state of oil and gas in Africa. Welcome.
Seems we've lost Thuli.
Thuli, as we continue to wait for Thuli, well, I think she'll be joining us late, just in the next few minutes. I'll request our next panel, if he's ready, Mr. Mohamed Ado. If he's ready, Mohamed Ado, let me give you a bit of his background information. Mohamed Ado is the director and founder of Power Shift Africa. I think, is Mohamed ready? Mohamed?
Sorry, yes. Okay. But if Thuli is back, I'm happy for her.
We are glad to have Thuli back.
Thuli is available. May you please unmute her? She cannot unmute herself, so may you please unmute her?
Oh, I've managed to unmute myself. Thank you for allowing me to be able to manage the screen. I'm sorry about that small hiccup. Thank you for the introduction. I'm really happy to be in this space today, discussing with the global climate movement on the state of oil in Africa. So I would like, my screen has changed. I'm not even able to share my presentation. I think I'm in as a participant. I'm sorry. I'm not sure why. I think whilst we work on that, I can.
Hello. Hello. Yeah, you're back. You're back.
Alexander.
I'm back as a panelist. So let me just share my screen. And it says only the host can share in this meeting.
Alex.
Prince,
okay,
can you open it?
Yeah. Oh, okay.
You please try now.
Thank you.
Okay, you're back. Thank you. We can see a very beautiful. Thank you.
That's not what you're supposed to see. This is what you're supposed to see. Oh, I'm sorry about that. So I would like us to talk about, fossil fuels in Africa. And in talking about the fossil fuels in Africa, this is an important discussion because the reality that the future of Africa's energy and the future of Africa's development is not fossil. So fossils have no role and very little role, no role at all in the development of the continent's energy access. So that is why I think it's important that we are talking about fossil fuels today and why we should push back against the proliferation of fossil fuels in the region, and also help our governments to develop the argument that fossils are not the critical mix for the energy for our economic development energy in the continent. So we've seen what has happened, for instance, with the oil, with fossil fuels, especially oil, gas, and coal in recent months. We've seen just how volatile and uncertain, these fossil fuels can be. We've seen them shift. Sorry, I'm not sure if you are seeing my slide too. But anyway,
yes, we are.
It's a very volatile space, and our governments have no control at all on how the market or the price of fossil fuels, mainly oil, gas, and coal, is determined. So in the past months, we saw, all these international reports on how, oil was crashing, and the oil-dependent economies in the continent, like Algeria, Nigeria, were very worried about the national budgets, because it meant their projections on the national budgets were going to drop by between 40% and in some instances by a huge 70%, which meant that they would struggle to meet the obligations that they have to their countries against the budget. So fossils are not stable. So our economic development cannot be pegged to the state of the fossil fuel industry, because it's a volatile one, especially in these times. And despite knowing the volatility of the sector, we've seen how there are projections for oil and gas development within the continent. I'm just showing you on my screen now how the projections were looking pre and post COVID. So before COVID happened, you can see that yellow line going straight up. So industry had no intentions to slow down, the proliferation of fossils in the continent. It was intended to go up. So now during the COVID times, we are seeing that it's not as high, but still the projections are that it's on an upward movement. In fact, the projections say almost 40% or more than 50% of the projected energy developments in the continent are oil and gas, and almost 70% of those are from, they are actually the projections from newcomers, which means new countries that are being targeted for exploration of fossils in the continent. So on slide 4, you'll see how you'll be able to pick up just how much we have in terms of the countries that are already producing, like Nigeria, Algeria, and those that are under development. And so just generally looking at the slide, the conclusion that you walk away with is that there are new producers, 4 of 10 countries that are projected to be top oil and gas producers for 2020 to 2050, and all of those are newcomers in the space. So the intention is to continue the exploration of fossil fuels in the continent. And this intention actually goes against, even the known reality that the continued exploration of fossil fuels, oil and gas, actually has an impact on us meeting the Paris Agreement, which is 1.5, anything below 1.5 degrees. And overshooting that Paris Agreement goal is it's going to have fatalistic effects on our economies and on our livelihoods, because the reality is that even the 1.5 degrees mark for Paris wasn't that ambitious. It was a compromise. So the reality is we needed to stay well below 1.5 for us to survive. So having more fossil fuel projects in the continent basically means we are overshooting the 1.5 degrees mark even more, and it gets us into a space where we are going to be cooking the continent together with other parts of the world. And all this is happening, for extraction of fossil fuels that are generally not for energy access at the local level. You realize that despite that, you know, fossil fuels have been extracted in the continent for so long, and you look at the producing countries like Nigeria and others, you'll realize that the continued production of fossil fuels has not actually, you know, helped or alleviated the energy poverty in the continent. So the extraction of fossil fuels is not for export. So on the slide, you will see how most of the extraction, even if it's happening in the inner parts of the continent, the lines, the pipelines are actually leading to exit points on the continent, because that is where the fossil fuels are going. They are going to the international markets to alleviate the energy needs of other markets other than our own. And in this mix, you will see how there are these consistent players, the industry. It's a handful of them, and you will find them in every space. And they are basically extracting for export and not for energy access at the local level. And what is what is critical as well to understand is how, you know, this extraction is being subsidized using public finance, which is where the issue of pushing hard for divestment of public finances, private finances from the industry comes in, is critical. Because you'll see from this screen, I'm not sure if the screen is there, but on the slide, you'll realize how, in terms of international public subsidies for fossil fuels, over 50% of international public finance in Africa is for fossil fuels. And if for instance, that 50% subsidies were being used to subsidize clean renewable energy, all the talk about clean renewable energy being not so developed and also not being able to provide jobs, and also, you know, being expensive, would not be would not be hearing much about it. But anyway, even with all this subsidy going to the fossil fuel industry, renewable energy is still working out, turning up as a cheaper source of energy for the continent. So the expansion of fossil fuels in Africa, if we do not push back and stop it successfully, it will fail. It will continue to fail to deliver on the promised development dividends, that is the revenues. You know how our governments are promised a lot of money for revenues, national revenue by the industry, and that becomes a myth and a fallacy when the production actually starts. So the promised dividends of revenues, of jobs, and of energy access have not materialized. So they will continue not to materialize, because the nature of the industry is not for providing a service to economies. It is about the profit margins, you know, for the shareholders of the industry in particular. So it's not about developing countries or making energy more accessible. It is business. It is about increasing the profit margins for the companies. And then also, if the fossil fuels extraction in Africa, it will continue, you know, to leave people behind while rewarding the corporations and their foreign financiers. So our countries will continue to get into loans, get into in unequal agreements with the industry, where they are locking in our economies into an unsustainable pathway in terms of energy development. So this paradigm of energy through fossil fuels will leave people behind while rewarding corporations and their financiers, the foreign financiers. And also the other reality is that this continued extraction will exacerbate environmental and social harm to communities. In this discussion, we're going to be hearing about the East Africa crude oil pipeline and the LNG, the gas exploration in Mozambique. And all those, when you listen closely, you realize that they are actually bringing a lot of environmental devastation to the communities through the communities where the extraction will be happening, and also where the pipelines will be going through. So the exacerbation of environmental and social harms to frontline communities will continue. And then also, the compounding of the regions, our African regions, climate vulnerability will be heightened. And then most importantly, I think also a point that we need to be really worried about, not that we shouldn't be worried about the others, it's that the continued exploration of fossil fuels in the continent, it's going to lock in our economic development, lock it into a dependence on the fossil fuels, and actually delay or lock out the coming in of renewable alternatives. This analogy, becomes clearer when you match it with the drugs, the drugs trade. The drug dealers will actually make sure that they get you locked into the habits.
Thuli?
Hello? Yes?
Let me interrupt you as you continue with the wonderful presentation. Kindly, in the interest of time, I would request maybe you shorten the presentation.
Thank you. In fact, that was almost my last point.
Okay, thank you very much.
The issue of lock-in and dependence on fossil fuels. So what should happen? Actually, we should push for a phase out of fossil fuels, and also, fight for a transition to clean, renewable energy, a just transition for our economies, and also the fast tracking of alternative pathways for energy access. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Thuli, for that wonderful presentation. I know our participants maybe have one or two questions or take away from the presentation. Kindly, if you have any question, type it on the chat box so that Lorraine will sample them, and I hope and believe your questions will be answered by Madam Thuli. What came out very, very clear from the presentation was that the multinationals that are focusing on fossil fuel do not come in the interest of the people, but they come in their own interest, majorly to export back the fossil fuel, leaving the communities to suffer. And an example, when I was looking up or thought about this, a question or a story came up from the Ogoni people and how they suffered, and how Ken Saro-Wiwa paid dearly to oppose fossil fuel. I think it's a very, very important discussion that we should focus on, to go back or to look for other sources of energy that is renewable energy. And Africa is truly well endowed with renewable energy sources. Our next panelist, that is Mohamed Ado. And I know many of you have seen Mohamed Ado gracing our televisions. And also you maybe have read about Mohamed Ado through his very, very educative blogs. Mohamed Ado is the director and founder of PowerShift Africa, an NGO that provides cutting-edge analysis, policy-based solutions, and up-to-the-minute media engagement from an African perspective, both within the continent and globally. He has worked for 18 years in the international development and environmental sectors, specializing in climate justice and clean energy. For over a decade, Mohamed has led Christian Aid's global activity, policy and advocacy work, specializing on challenges faced by these developing nations. He has worked or is also still engaged with the United Nations Framework Convention for Climate Change, where he engages and influences governments and other stakeholders in favor of the world's poor and poor people and countries. Mohamed Ado will talk about the need to phase out fossil fuels and fast-track solutions in fast-track solution, especially giving focus to the East African project on oil and pipeline. Karibu and welcome, Mohamed.
Thank you so much, Omondi. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're joining us today for this webinar. It's a particular pleasure for me to join you today for this very important discussion on how we can, together help chart an alternative pathway for Africa's development, one that aligns our growth and our development with the 1.5 degree world target. We all know that if the Paris Agreement goals are going to be met, we need a step change in climate action and political will. While some citizens, countries, and companies are committing to reducing emissions, the main cause of the climate crisis, the fossil fuel industry, continues to expand, including right in our backyard, with the example Omondi cited there with the East Africa crude oil pipeline. And so we cannot afford to delay the phase out of fossil fuels any further. And we must address how we fast track global progress towards safety and more cost-effective solutions. So allow me today to address you on the need to phase out fossil fuel and fast track real solutions. And when we talk about real solution, we're talking about the just transition to a renewable energy powered future. If you allow me, I'll actually begin with something you all know, which is the fact that we're facing the risk of a climate disruption. Let me give you some quick facts, just so that we know what we're facing, what our global community is facing. Our world is on track for hitting above 4 degrees by 2100, and then higher thereafter. If you've seen when the Paris Agreement deal was struck, are consistent with hitting of above 3 degrees Celsius by 2100, and then higher thereafter. The entire world has a decade to take decisive action. We need to limit to be able to limit global warming to below 1.5 degrees Celsius requires emissions reductions of 45% by 2030, and then net zero emissions by 2050. And if we're going to limit global temperature rise to below 2 degrees, then we need emissions reductions of 25% by 2030, and then net zero by 2070. So these are the two scenarios that they gave us. If you look at the latest data that we have, and I will take the example of the latest, which is the 2018 data, the remaining carbon budget for 1.5 degrees Celsius is around 580 gigatons of carbon dioxide. So that is the total, carbon budget that is available for the whole world. And the world is emitting around 50 tons per year, 50 gigatons per year. So if you think of how long 580 gigatons is going to take us, that is going to be exceeded by 2030 in the absence of major emissions reductions. So climate change, like nuclear weapons, is an essential threat that we're facing. We know very well, weapons of mass destruction and climate change are the two main global threats. But in 2020, climate action failure topped weapons of mass destruction in terms of both impact and likelihood, making it the greatest risk facing the world according to the World Economic Forum Global Risk Report that was produced in 2020. And I think this is important for people to think that the fact that for the very first time, climate action failure is considered as a greater global risk than even weapons of mass destruction. Why do we need to phase out fossil fuels? Because we tend to talk about the need to actually phase out fossil fuels, phase in renewable energy. But why do we really need to do this? I'll give you some quick facts so that it helps you to actually understand why we need to do this. There was a report that was produced in 2019 called the Global the production gap report. This report was produced jointly by UNEP, Stockholm Environment Institute, and other organizations. What they found is that fossil fuels accounts for over 75% of global greenhouse gas emissions and nearly 90% of all carbon dioxide emissions. The fossil fuel industry is also planning to produce about 50% more fossil fuels by 2030 than will be consistent with the 2-degree pathway, and 120% more than will be consistent with a 1.5-degree pathway. International cooperation is going to be central in winding down fossil fuel production. For the world to remain within the Paris, climate limits, what was agreed in Paris, limiting global warming to below 2 degrees and pursuing further efforts to limit global warming to below 1.5 degrees, then we need the production of coal, oil, and gas being phased out, and not in one geography, but across the world. The production gap report assessed, fossil fuel plants against the global climate plans. And this is what it found. The carbon dioxide emissions from those, developed global fossil fuel reserves, and I'm talking about developed global fossil fuel reserves, those emissions that we know that are going to be emitted as a result of development of reserves that are currently in development will exceed the 1.5 degree temperature limit goal. So the carbon budget that we have for 1.5 degree is going to be exceeded if we just ban the fossil fuel that are there in the global fossil fuel reserves that have been developed. Now, if you think about the 2 degree, that is going to be also exceeded. And this is important for us to just understand. We're talking about limiting global warming to below 2 degrees and pursuing further efforts to limit it below 1.5. And the continent of Africa, the 55 African countries, are pushing for a global limit of 1.5, just so that you understand. In this continent, with the current level of warming of only 1.1 degrees, we're already suffering the worst impact of climate change, and we're suffering this fast. And so what the fossil fuel industry is planning is actually going to exceed, the pathway that is consistent with 1.5, the pathway that is consistent with 2 degrees. And this is already what is being developed, not what is being explored now. Now, so what are the risks of delay? Now, like if we don't actually effectively tackle global fossil fuel supply, what are the risks that this presents us? Let me just quickly run you through some of those risks. The other is if we continue delaying the transition and delaying the phase out of fossil fuels, then the transition is going to be much harder. It will also create stranded assets, and it risks financial turmoil. The more you see countries like Uganda, Tanzania, Mozambique, Senegal, going down the fossil path and trying to actually invest in the development of these reserves, the higher the stranded risk that they actually creating for the economy. It also risks workers and communities. It's going to delay the expansion of renewable energy. I had one, I think it was a moderator, who referred to this continent as one that is blessed with renewable energy. Let me just tell you, I don't think there's any geography in the world, across the world, that is as blessed with renewable energy potential as Africa. But sadly, we're not exploiting that potential. 600 million Africans, 2 out of 3 Africans don't currently have electricity. So this is the continent that is suffering energy poverty. We're still in the dark when it comes to energy. And so the opportunity for us to actually address our electricity needs and be able to address our energy poverty is going to be delayed if we're going to be continuously be pushing for fossil fuels. It's also going to delay economic diversification, so that we can actually be able to move into more sustainable sectors. And sadly, as you may have observed, going to consolidate powerful pro-fossil fuel political constituencies, because this is where they get their money, this is where they get their patronage. And that is a risk we face across the world if we go down the fossil fuel path. And it's also going to increase the technical, economic, legal, and political lock-in. And if we fail to actually stop the development of fossil fuel, and we continue overshooting the safe temperature limit, then it's going to expose us to what is called geoengineering, which we know it's very dangerous. Because once we overshoot 2 degrees, the risk the world faces is actually going to be one that is going to require geoengineering. Now,
Mohammed,
given that yes, please.
Let me remind you, in the interest of time, you have a very wonderful presentation, but in the interest of time, I would wish you summarize. Thank you.
That's all right. Now, in Africa, and particularly in East Africa, we're now facing a risk, and this is emanating from Total. This very disturbing development, on African soil, which is abetted and aided by that oil giant called Total, that will ultimately see the global temperatures breaching the 1.5 degree guardrail. The French company is currently seeking permission to build a vast oil pipeline that will snake across East Africa in a bid to get oil from 2 oil fields in Uganda. But later, they also plan to actually use that same pipeline to be able to transfer oil from oil fields in DRC and from South Sudan to the Indian Ocean, and then to refineries to be burnt. And this is a huge risk. If the continent of Africa is a continent that actually fought hard for that global limit of 1.5 degrees to be included in the Paris Agreement, then we can't let the continent of Africa to be the place where that guardrail is going to be breached. So one thing I think that is important for me to convey is fossil fuels pose a risk, but they pose a risk to the whole world. Given that we missed out on the first industrialization that was largely powered through fossil fuels, then this continent stands an opportunity to lead the world in the global transition and in effectively leapfrogging dirty energy and becoming green leaders. And so the thing I want you to think about is, how do we avoid together, that total disaster in Africa? And for us to do that, then we need to actually pool our resources together across the continent and then engage our allies in other parts of the world. And what do we need to do when we get together? We will help end exploration and development of new fossil fuels. We will help ensure that first we phase out fossil fuel production in line with the global climate goal of 1.5 degree. But to fill the void, we will fast track just transition for every worker, for every community and country, so that they can meet their sustainable energy needs from renewable energy. So these three things together are the solution to climate change. You will remember that this world is also not equal. There is inequality, and that is endemic. The richest 10% of the global population earn around half of the global income. And this is an important factor for me to share with you. And the richest 10% of the global population produce half of the emissions that have caused climate change. Whereas the 10% that are poor are actually only accounting for 10% of the global emissions. Now, here's an opportunity. Let me just finish up with this. Here's an opportunity for us to get together and address the challenge that climate change presents by enabling a transition away from fossil fuels, but at a scale that allows us to transition from fossil fuels and then fast track the solutions to renewables. And this is my appeal to you, colleagues, that there can't be a solution to climate change without addressing the challenge that fossil fuel pose, but also opening up the opportunity that Africa has of actually leapfrogging that energy and becoming a global leader. Let's get behind that call and together make the case for Africa to actually leapfrog, but help the world transition from fossil fuels and become a green leader and leverage that voice internationally. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ado. Working together. This has been my takeaway points from that wonderful presentation. And I've just realized that weapons of mass destruction, which we consider so dangerous, are way behind when it comes to the emerging issues like climate change. Climate change, as Mr. Ado has said, is one of the most dangerous and harmful activity of the 21st century. Mr. Ado has also said that Africa is well endowed with natural resources, especially renewable energy resources, but suffers from energy poverty or poverty energy. I think our participants have a lot of takeaway from this, from the wonderful presentation. and also a lot of questions that I am asking you to type in the chat box so that they will be answered after our presentations. Now we are going to be a bit entertained. I know we are a bit tired, or not tired, but we need to be at least stretched. We're going to be entertained by the Africa book, XBZ. XBZ is a spoken word artist from Kenya. Please allow me to welcome XBZ. XBZ.
Sorry, Mr. Jack. XBZ is having network connections. We can just proceed. He'll come in later after the last one.
Okay, thank you. I've been told that XBZ is still working on his internet connection, and he will join us shortly. After the, what a wonderful moment to welcome Annabella Lemos, that is. Annabella Lemos will be our next panelist, and she has a vast experience in climate justice. Annabella Lemos is an environmental justice activist and a founding member and board director of Justica Ambiental in Mozambique. She was also the founding member of Mozambique's first environmental organization, the first in Mozambique, in 1998, and the organization is known as Refuelling, which she left to start Justice Ambiental. She has always undertaken activities at both Justice Ambiental and Refuelling as a volunteer. She has been working on environmental justice for over 20 years. Apart from being the board of director of Justice Ambiental, she is also involved in Justice Ambiental activities of research, campaign, fieldwork, the Environmental Justice School, and the newsletter. Welcome, Annabella Lemos, and Annabella Lemos will take us through the state of oil and gas in Mozambique. Welcome.
Thank you so much for inviting me. And I'm going to start sharing. Good afternoon, everyone. Is my screen shared? Is my presentation on screen? Sorry, I can't see here. Hello?
Yes, we can see it.
Hello? We can see it.
Okay. I know the two previous panelists were very good explaining the situation we are in. I'm just going to be quickly on my first slides because it's more or less what they talk about. We're living in a planetary crisis. The fifth report of Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, 2013 to 14, was very clear the impacts of climate change are going to be more severe than previously understood. And the developed countries demand temperature rise to keep under 1.5. The Africa group called the two a suicide pact. As it is at this moment, the way we heading, it's already is going to go over the 1.5. So anything that happens on a global sphere, we're going to be more affected the suit of the hemisphere. What means for Africa, the situation? Climate change is a big concern all over the world. Hundreds of millions of people lose their livelihoods and life. The Climate Vulnerability Index says 7 out of 10 of the most affected countries are in Africa. More drought, more floods. I think many of us in Africa already feeling that. Cape Town in South Africa is still recovering from a years-long drought. Agriculture will start to fail across the continent. We already seeing that. Temperature will rise and start to get unbearable in many places. Sea level rise will lift up our coastal. More disease. We're living in a COVID-19 situation that never before we thought this could happen. It's happened. It's here. And the ecosystem breakdown, we see that too. We're already feeling what was predicted a few years ago. In Mozambique, like the rest of Africa, climate change impacts are clear. On top of that, only 30% of our people have electricity. And even those numbers, we always doubt, because to have access and have energy are two different things. 1 billion people are without electricity access. That's a big number. You know, last year we had Cyclone Idai in March and Cyclone Kenneth in April 2009. Killed at least 1,400 people in Mozambique, Zimbabwe, and Malawi. But we forgot the hundreds and thousands. They were displaced, many were missed, and have died of cholera and other illness impacted by what happened with the cyclone. Still today, you are into 2020, many people don't have houses, they don't have their livelihood back, and they're still suffering from the cyclone. That would be enough for any government to stop and think and try to find ways to develop whatever we can call developed to the country and see what the needs of the country are and what should we do in this world of climate crisis. But no. Instead, our government opened the doors to all the worst companies of gas and oil. And the gas industry started in Mozambique. And as many fuel companies in Africa are part of the gas industry in Cabo Delgado. We know in Africa, Total is in Africa, Shell is in Africa, any ExxonMobil, and many others. They're all the same in all of our countries. The impact of gas industry in Mozambique, even before the exploration start, it has already impacted. 550 families already lost their homes, livelihoods, and land. Fishers, their life depends on the fish. They moved them far away from the sea. They gave them a house with nothing and no sea to fish and no access to the sea. Militarization violence has increased in numbers. Violence against women, sexual abuse are increased. Climate destruction already started with the tests and even before the exploration. We believe the Kiribati archipelago is a UNESCO site and has a very unique ecosystems and animals and all type of corals that will be destroyed with the gas industry. The money that should be spent in education and health will be spent in the gas industry because the government of Mozambique has the counterpart. This village that I'm showing you, it's a Milamba village. This photo was life before gas started. The livelihood was quiet. The life was depending on fish, crustaceans, peasant agriculture, and suddenly they moved from there to a city created. They did houses, yes, that they gave them houses, but nothing else. As you can see, no sea, no land to cultivate their livelihood. On top of everything that is happened to the communities, they didn't have the right to say no. The public meetings are controlled by the government. They had leaders that didn't protect their community because in Mozambique, every community has their leader. And usually their leaders are chosen by the community and they are the ones that are responsible to protect the communities. Didn't happen. The moment the companies coming, they roll off, they just say that there was not even an option to choose if they really want to move or not, if they want to a different life or not. There was not at all. They just say, we're going to need your land because it's going to be exploration on the sea. And then they're going to create a plant to transform the gas in liquid. And that is a huge impact on environment and people. So suddenly we have communities moving without wanted. And in 2007, to make everything worse, or start in the beginning of small attacks start increasing to the point the killing and the occupation of some of the territories and cities on the land, it's enormous. Killing, human rights violations are constant, not only from the criminals, the insurgents, or whatever they call them, but also from the armies from Mozambique government. And violations or carry on in such a way. There was a complaint already at Amnesty International about some horrible films that are releasing in the media. They're so shocking that I don't have courage to see them, because that's whoever does that is not human. And that's what gas brought to Mozambique. In a peaceful province of Cabo Delgado, everything is shattered. We have thousands, if not millions, of people with no out. Yes, not much time.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to be quickly. So the scenario is horrible. Gas, it's not a transition fuel as many advert. The transition fuel from oil to renewable energy. Actually, the impacts are as bad or worse than oil, because you don't see the gas. If there's a leak on gas, you don't see. It's gas. As with oil, you see. Mm-hmm. So what happened in Cabo Delgado, it's the beginning of many other problems in Africa. And the sad thing is that we know what is the problem. We know what was the reason for us to arrive at this climate crisis that we live in. We should not repeat the mistakes that the North did. Instead, doing exactly the same. So it's easy, as the previous panelist says. We have sun. We can give energy to everyone with solar. Some places with wind, and many other renewable energy. Decentralized, above all, energy for the people. Decentralized, small scale, community-owned renewable energy. We don't need mega energy projects to deliver energy just to a few, to the elite one, or to just the cities, not to everyone. As in Mozambique, we have a dam that exports energy to South Africa, and the people living next to the dam and getting all the impacts, they don't have energy. That's not the world we live today, and you need to change that. So the solution, I don't think I can explain more, because our panelists before me explained very clear. We need to stop all dirt energy. We need to stop fast solution. And when I talk about fast solutions, we need to be very careful to don't fall into traps like red commodity of nature and re-engineering and all those solutions bringing out by the same companies that put the world in the way we are today. We cannot trust. And the only solution for us, it's small scale renewable energy. And to close, to don't take more of the time, there's some useful sites that we can see a lot of our thinking, what we think could be the solution. We have solutions. We need to be very strong and demand those solutions, and not accepting what is the big companies of oil are doing. They capture our government. They destroy the communities in every way possible, their livelihoods, their structure, their family, everything. On top of that, they're destroying the earth. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Annabella. Thank you for that wonderful presentation. And as Annabella was giving out her presentations, something came into my mind. Why is Africa considered or referred to as the darkest continent? Anybody who has been to Africa will surely know that Africa has 24/7 solar energy. Why do you think we are referred to as a darkest continent? My takeaway from Annabella's presentation was that if we continue following the pathway of fossil fuels, then we'll face ecosystem breakdown. And ecosystem breakdown can be temporal and spatial. It can affect the community living next to projects that are fossil fuel related, but also affect the entire globe with time. I know our participants also have some takeaways and also a lot of questions to ask Annabella. And trust me, she will be here to answer all your questions. What you need to do is type in your question in the chat box and she will really answer your questions. Our next and final panelist is Augustine Jamshi. And Augustine is a lawyer with 25 years of environmental policy and governance in Cameroon and Central Africa sub-Saharan region, Central African sub-region. Augustine has experience in legislative and policy drafting in areas of access to genetic resource and benefit sharing, biosafety, biosecurity, access to environmental information, and public participation in decision-making. Augustine also has held and continues to hold several elected positions representing African civil society of the environment sector at the global level. He is the pioneer chair of the Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance and also is in the UNEP Major Group representative for Africa. He was a member of UNEP Major Group's representative from 2010 to 2012. Currently, or presently, he holds a position of Executive Secretary at the Bioresource Development and Conservation in Cameroon, and also the coordinator of the political and technical affairs in the Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance, where he has been re-elected as the African civil society representative on the World Bank's Forest Carbon Partnership Facility, as well as the Carbon Fund. He represents the energy sector in the African Development Bank's CSO committee, in which he doubles as the co-chair. Welcome, Mr. Augustine, and Mr. Augustine will take us through the state of play of renewable energy in Africa. Kindly, sorry again, which is not sorry for that mistake. We refer to Augustine as Dr. Augustine Jamshi, not Mr. Welcome.
Thank you, Jack. Clearly, for those who know Augustine, I'm not Augustine. I'm sitting in Augustine, accept his apologies. He had a last-minute medical emergency, and I'm glad to step in for him. My name is Eugene Fongwa. I am the thematic lead for Just Transition and Energy Access at the Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance. Probably many people in the room clearly knows what PACJA is. We are a coalition of 1,000 or so CSOs from across 48 countries on the continent. And we work principally to advance a people-centered and rights-based, just and inclusive approach to addressing climate change and environmental challenges across the world, but with special attention to the continent. Our energy work is really around the Africa Coalition for Sustainable Energy and Access, which Augustine, who was supposed to do this presentation, coordinates. And AXIA, just like PAGJA, is also an alliance of organizations, but also outside of the civil society to include business, academia, and research that are working to advance renewable energy transformation and access on the continent. Let me quickly say something about our approach, because it's going to be the bedrock of this presentation. We look forward to a continent where there's an increase in renewable energy, but where also the energy systems are transformed and where access to energy is greatly expanded. Our belief is that the problem with the energy sector on the continent is not only a problem of the energy source, of the fossil fuel, but the energy system itself was never built to work for the poor. And the transition that we all advocate, we need to take into account those governance issues. Now, let me start. I think the previous speakers have made a few points that I would want to come back to very briefly so that I get quickly into my presentation. The energy challenge on the continent can be viewed through multiple lenses. One of them is that of access and reliability. And as it's already been pointed out, Africa is a very energy poor continent with only about, or with up to about 6 million of its people without electricity. But the governance of the energy system on the continent is also one that is characterized by a centralized grid in many countries. And these centralized grids really work as monopolies. Mohammed spoke quite extensively about the relationship between energy and climate change. And right now, Africa is contributing about around 4% of energy-tight emissions to the global stock of greenhouse gases. And so we find that access to sustainable and modern energy services is a prerequisite for meeting basic human needs and for economic and social development across the continent. Even before we start talking about Paris, the climate change targets or alignment with SDGs, but there are basic needs on the continent that the energy sector is not being providing at this point. Now, renewable energy, as you've pointed out a lot, Jack, we have an enormous stock of untapped renewable energy on the continent. If you take just a quick sample of what's available, solar, which you have mentioned over and over, up to 1,000 gigawatts in potential. If you take even geothermal, with the examples of what we see in countries like Kenya, there's quite a potential as well. But also, we shouldn't forget biomass, which at this point represent the energy source for the vast majority of the continent's poor people. And so, yes, you're very right when you say that Africa is endowed with renewable energy resources. But what we see is what was pointed out. I think Thuli pointed this out in a presentation, that up to 70% or more of investments in the energy sector continue to go to fossil fuels. And so when we look at investments in renewable energy, we should bear in mind that it's only the 30% of investments in the energy sector. So it doesn't look like we're doing quite some progress in investing in renewable energy. And there's some very real opportunities for renewable energy take-up on the continent. If you only take a look at the indices of African countries, up to 45 of them contain renewable energy targets. And the belief is that if governments only did what they've already pledged to do, we could see a massive scale up of renewable energy on the continent. One of the things that has emerged is over the last couple of years is the idea that renewable energy investments are going up. And it's quite interesting to take a closer look at that fact, because when you look at the fine print, it's quite a worrying picture. Take, for example, the idea that between 2018 and 2017 and 2018, there was a jump of more than 60% in renewable energy investment. The only problem with that statistic is that all of that energy is coming from South Africa, which means that South Africa alone is driving the vast majority of renewable energy investments on the continent. If you take a look, if you keep South Africa out and take a look just at the other countries, you find that Kenya, for example, in 2018 was driving all of the investments in renewable energy on the continent. And that tells you that there is clearly a poor distribution of that investment, not only territorially, but we find that that distribution is also weak in terms of the kind of renewable energy technologies and sources where the money is going to. Let's take for the example of solar, which you have pointed out. With the vast potential that we have, solar is only attracting a bit of the renewable energy investment compared to onshore wind. And this mismatch is quite interesting because there is a stronger potential for off-grid solutions with solar energy across the continent. The sun is among, in my view, the most evenly distributed renewable energy resource on the continent. But we find that investments are not going in that direction. This graph, again, points out to the mismatch, between the different countries. This is 2018 here, and you find how much of renewable energy investment is taking place in South Africa compared to the rest of the continent, which is just a tiny bit, about 40% of that investment. Now, the road ahead is an interesting one. We've read all the reports what would happen. IREA, for example, the International Renewable Energy Agency, projecting, for example, that Africa could meet nearly a quarter of its energy needs from indigenous and clean renewables by 2030. That's in a decade. We need to question whether, with the trend that we're seeing, this is possible. Or the idea that modern renewable energy, an estimate of about 310 gigawatts, could provide half the continent's total electricity generation capacity. Or that we could have a 7-fold increase in renewable energy by 2030. I'm looking at what Thuli has presented. I'm hearing what Mohammed said, and I'm asking whether we're on track towards all of this prediction that the energy agencies are making. I'm going to skip a few slides, and I may come back to it if we have time. But I want to say that there still is a very serious challenge when it comes to investments in renewable energy on the continent. There is a very strong global affinity for oil. It's still very strong. Now, I want to look at what has happened with COVID-19 and try to compare it, looking backward at what major disruptions have done to the energy of the country. If you look at this graph, the energy consumption, and this is fossil fuels, is always growing. It's on a steady rise. But if you look, each time there was a major global shock, there was a slight dip in energy consumption, just as we are observing with COVID-19. During the Spanish flu in the 1920s, the Great Depression, you see another dip. And the real challenge, if you take the two oil shocks, you see slight dips. And the great challenge is, how do we move in this direction? Because each time there has been a dip in energy consumption, it has quickly picked up. And that is because I believe there is this very strong affinity for oil and gas. This briefly looks at what we've seen with COVID-19.
Mr. Eugene?
Yes.
Yes, in the interest of time, yes, you can wind up.
I thought you said we had 15 minutes. All right, I'm going to try to wrap up. I've just spoken for about 8 minutes. I'm going to try to wrap up.
Yeah,
and if you take a look just as at the last couple of months, see the behavior of just one of the indicators of energy consumption, which is congestion, automobile congestion, and you see the changes that have happened. A strong dip in the demand for fossil fuels. Unfortunately, we do not yet have in place neither the political will nor the level of investment needed to maintain this shift in demand for fossil fuels, especially because of the way our industrial systems have been built to depend on these resources. So going forward, getting to that point where we believe renewable energy would be the main energy source, particularly for Africa, there's going to be need for significant investment. One estimate is that in Africa, it will be about $70 billion per year up to 2030. I'm sure in the discussions we're going to get into discussions about climate finance, which has failed to come. But also we think that there's going to be need to strengthen local voices. There is increasingly a strong understanding that local-led actions are likely going to provide the impetus that we need to make the shift and to deal with climate change squarely if we must handle the problem. But also, and I think, is the idea that we need to consistently seize the opportunity for renewable energy, to position renewable energy in fossil fuel resistance campaigns. Divestment alone doesn't solve the problem, but we really need to redirect those resources and make them investments in renewable energy. Otherwise, the banks and the businesses will just channel that money to something more profitable. Now, I'm going to end here with a little bit of the conceptualization of what we see now if we take an analysis of all of the policy approaches that different countries are implementing. There's one that focuses on access. All of the African governments keep telling you that the priority is access. The problem with that is that it leads to a reliance on fossil fuels. Now, we could have a policy focus on governance, which is not investing only in the source, but transforming the energy system itself, which is, in my view, likely to address issues of access, but also issues of sustainability. And then we have a policy focus on climate action. And a lot of us in this movement really focus on that. But there is also the high risk that a strong focus, pursuit of Paris Agreement alignment, or an eye on emission reductions could undermine the renewable energy access issues that come with governance of the energy systems. And in conclusion, I could say that sustainable energy access is key to development on the continent. That's clear. Renewable energy potential is there, it's strong, it just needs the right amount of investment to grow and help grow Africa. But also, even though we see that renewable energy investment is rising, it's still well below the investments that are going into fossil fuel as been pointed. And perhaps we could say that the policies that address both access issues and climate concerns are going to be more likely sustainable in the continent, in that it addresses two of the core energy challenges that the continent faces. Thank you very much. It was really a pleasure to be part of this conversation.
Thank you so much, Eugene. Eugene has just presented it in a manner that we could see, we foresaw from Dr. Augustine. Thank you so much, Eugene. And Eugene, what I took away from your presentation is that local-led actions are much important in creating a renewable energy resource or investments in Africa. I'm very much glad that you are also echoing the Agenda 21 principles of which states that local actions are very, very much important. And you are wondering whether Africa could fully focus or move to renewable energy resources. And it is true, Africa has the potential. Like, for example, here at the Don Bosco Tech Africa, we have invested so much in renewable energy, for example, in solar, in our TVET centers, and also in biogas. These are some of the activities that can be done in Africa so that by the year 2030, we are halfway invested in renewable energy. Thank you so much, Mr. Eugene. And I'll now welcome our my co-moderator, Lorraine. Lorraine has sampled a lot of your questions. We have received so many questions to our panelists that I think Lorraine will read, and then our panelists will surely give us a conclusive answers. Welcome, Lorraine.
Thank you very much, Jack. So my name is Lorraine Chiponda, and I'm the Africa Core Coordinator for the Africa Core Network, a network of various organizations working to push back on coal investments and advancing a just transition towards renewable energy. So as the presentations were being done, I was just listing down all the questions that were coming in through the chat box. So I encourage everyone to just add their questions on the chat box. And as for answering the questions, every presenter is going to respond to the following questions. And I'm urging our presenters to just take probably 1 minute and 30 seconds to respond to this first round of questions. So I'm going to read out a few questions and then we get the responses. And we're going to use the order that we used in presenting. So the first question is, what is the position of faith-based organizations, CBOs, NGOs, CSOs, in discussion on the proposed East Africa crude oil pipeline in Uganda? And do you think these organizations, the CSOs, FBOs, NGOs, can influence policies targeting this particular project? What practical advice would you give to those championing for fossil fuel in Africa, especially the eco projects? That's the first question. And a number of questions were on how this can be done. So I'll just read out the following questions. They are more or less the same, and then we can get responses from the panel. How best can we address ECOP? Should it be stopped once and for all? What would it take to stop it? And another question is, how about the possible environmental impacts of big dams and huge areas of solar panels and mining of the minerals that are supposed to feed into the renewable energy project? And another question is also on a person was saying, I would love to hear what you would say is the responsibility of the individual to contribute to just transition. What is the responsibility of the individual to respond to just transition? And another question is, what are some of the suggestions of alternative fuels that could be used on a large scale, since you are saying no to fossil fuels? So what are the energy sources that we can use at a large scale that can remedy energy issues in Africa? So I think I will go back to the first presenter and we can use the same order that we're responding to. So I'm leaving the floor to our presenters. Presenters, any response to the said questions?
Hi, Lorraine. Am I the first presenter?
Yes, okay, thank you.
Okay, I'm going to just use my 1.5 minutes to emphasize a few things which are common threads to the questions that I heard you reading out. One, it's the myth that renewable energy or alternative sources of energy cannot drive economic development for Africa. I think Eugene, Mohammed, and Annabella have touched on this in their different presentations, that is a myth. We need to deal with it. Africa is blessed with resources for renewable alternative energy, so we would not be short of renewable energy sources in the continent. So that is the one myth that we need to deal with and understand that Africa can leapfrog all the mistakes that were made by other economies on fossil fuels and just go straight to clean energy development. Two, on projects like the East Africa crude oil pipeline and the liquid gas project in Mozambique, it's important to use every lever available to us to push back against these projects. At the very lowest level, it's extremely important that our communities are aware of the challenges that are posed by fossil fuels in communities relating to access to their land, because they will be displaced for these projects, and also issues like pollution of the rivers, and also issues like conflict. I think Annabella listed them all. So our communities need to be continuously mobilized and be kept aware of these challenges so that they can push back. And then when using every lever, I mean, we've got to go to where the finances are coming from, try and stop those taps. AFDB, bilateral arrangements by northern governments, private finance, we must be aware and go and stop it. Divest from fossil fuels. And so those are the financial levers. And then the legal levers. Where we can, let's go and fight the industry in court, like a number of organizations are doing for the gas project in Mozambique. We are seeing organizations in France, in the UK, launching legal fights. For the ECOP inside Uganda, organizations are going to court, trying to stop the projects, stop parts of it. Tilenga is in court right now. So we need to use every available lever. And then the policy level. Policy level is where we'll have interactions, direct interactions with our governments, for them to realize that the policy of enabling fossil fuel development in the continent has devastating effects on the local population, and it further drives us into energy poverty as a continent. So that would be my general response to it, that let's use every available avenue. Every avenue should be an opportunity and a site for pushing back against the fossil fuel encroachment into the continent. Thank you.
Let me just follow up. Let me just follow up and add a couple of points. This is Mohammed. I think one of Africa's great strategic advantages is that we're not encumbered with outdated fossil fuel infrastructure. And so we can instead leapfrog dirty energy and move straight to clean, cheap solar and wind. And this continent is blessed in abundance with renewable energy. We're one of the fastest growing continents on the planet with one of the most dynamic economies. And so what we need to be thinking about is how will we address the sustainable energy needs of the more than 500 million Africans who currently lack access to regular affordable electricity. And so a clean energy revolution in Africa is required to win the fight against energy poverty and to ensure this continent, leapfrogs developed countries as it did in embracing, for example, the mobile phone revolution of the 2000s. What we need is basically create a platform so that we can be able to help meet the development needs and the aspirations of our population, and afford them the opportunity to actually benefit from, energy and electricity in particular. And how do we do that? That becomes the next question, perhaps. One thing we need to recognize is fossil fuels are not the way to do that. That is going to help the world overshoot the 1.5-degree guardrail, and as a cradle of mankind, and as a continent that has, a great proportion of its populations as young people, as youth. What we need to be doing is leading the world in the revolution, and particularly the green energy revolution. And the best way to do that is to microgrids. One of the things we need to recognize is that a lot of our populations are currently underserved because they are mostly in remote areas, and those people cannot be served through grid-based systems with centralized control, and that is what you get with fossil fuels. What you need is microgrids that allows us to be able to actually provide abundant clean energy resources where our populations are, and do it in a way that you can also drive the small and micro enterprises, because it's not just about providing access to energy, it's actually about powering the economy. One of the things that was found recently is that those countries that enjoy 100% access, the reason they've been able to achieve that is because they invested in microgrid, they've invested in renewables so that they can light up their remote corners. Africa is no different, and we can easily benefit from this largely untapped technology. And the way to do that is by going renewables, but going down, smart, distributed, democratized, renewable energy solutions for our population. I'll stop there.
We can have comments from Annabella, then Eugene.
Hello, and thank you. I think the Thuli Mohamed said very clear what are the solutions. Hello? Yeah.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, we can.
You can hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I think we know that we cannot carry on using fossil fuels and many other energy resource. One question, we know what to do, we know what's the ideal and what's the solution. The question is that how can we do it? Like one of the first questions, that how can you change this context of powerful companies? It's a struggle against giants. And I think the only solution is we believe what is the right choice. We know what is energy justice for all and not destroying the environmental. So we just need to carry on to connect to each other, because alone we're not going to change anything. And maybe find ways to stop, as Thuli was saying, disinvest, and one on one maybe we can change. It's not something easy, it's not something that's gonna turn overnight, but we know the way, so we just need to carry on to have examples to see what bit by bit we can change. I think that's all.
Thanks. Thank you, Annabella. Eugene.
Thank you. What I may add, and I agree with what has been said up to this point, is that the advocacy so far has focused on the major players. We have seen in the examples of Kenya that when local communities are sufficiently mobilized, they can stand up even against some of the strongest forces we can imagine. The people of Africa need to be told that fossil fuels may solve their energy access needs, but would cause them more problems. And that there is an alternative which is cleaner, it's cheaper, and one where they will participate in both producing and distribution. Renewable energy, like I said earlier, is really, in our view, not just about the energy source, but the energy governance, the ownership and control of energy access. If you have sun rays over your roof, who has the rights over those rays? So these are really opportunities for people to participate in ways in the energy sector in ways that they haven't participated before. I don't know any African community that has directly benefited from oil and gas. I don't know any which has benefited directly from mega dams, apart from paying bills at the end of the month or buying fuel at the pump. This is an opportunity for people to actually participate, invest, get involved, and we can create a movement, a grassroots movement that transform our understanding of energy, and that energy is a right. It's really not a commodity, in my view.
Thank you very much, Eugene. Father Benedict, are you going to comment or? Okay, so probably Father Benedict is not available. So I'm going to read the second round of questions from the chat, from the comment boxes. The questions are, how about the possible environmental impact of big dams and huge areas of solar panels and mining of the minerals? So I think I asked this question, but maybe we need to address how we're going to address the intensification of mineral extraction that will cause more environmental issues to feed into the renewable energy sector. And how can we address environmental racism and environmental injustice in Africa? How can we address this? And maybe you have to listen, but this is a very long question because it has got a cap from a Forbes article. It says a recent United Nations report warns that the raw materials used in electric car batteries are highly concentrated in a small number of countries where environmental and labor regulations are weak or non-existent. Thus, battery production for EVs is driving a boom in small-scale artisanal cobalt production in the DRC, which supplies 2/3 of global output of the mineral. These artisanal miners, which account for up to a quarter of the country's production, have been found to be dangerous and employ child labor. Any comments on this? And also the final question, is anyone listening to the call to shift from fossil fuel to renewable energy? And let me also include this last one, that how do we get investors to move from fossil fuels to renewable energy? How can that be done?
Lorraine, before the panelists answer the question, I would propose that this become our last round of questions. Any possible question we can answer later, so that in the interest of time, we finish on time. Thank you, Lorraine.
Okay, thank you very much. So since this is the final round of questions, there were some questions that were asking the presenters to share their information, their resources. So may you please do that in the chat box so that if anyone has got follow-up questions, they can link with you directly. And also maybe GCCM will also provide their contacts for other questions. So maybe we just have this final round responses to the questions asked.
Lauren, I'm happy to respond to the question on racism or inequality, yes, if yes, that's okay. So I referred to this earlier in my presentation, that the richest 10% and around half of the global income. So this is important fact for us to remember. And the richest 10% of the world's population also produce half of global emissions, whereas the poorest half, a population that is roughly 4 billion people, generate just about 10% of global emissions. And we are in a world where about 1 billion people, and half of that, half of those are in Africa, lack access to electricity. And so the poorest countries in this world, and this includes our continent, Africa, is suffering from climate change, while we have contributed the least. And if we're going to be able to develop, we need to be making sure that the actions that are taken are going to be fair and just actions. One of the things that are important for us to be reminding ourselves is, if we're going to be able to effectively tackle climate change, we need to actually allocate the effort between people and between countries based on the scale of capacity to enable the transition from fossil fuels, but also the scale of the challenge of transitioning from fossil fuels. I think the major challenges that will arise for those countries that are dependent on fossil fuels and have a significant proportion of the energy provision, their employment, their government revenue, their GDP coming from fossil fuels, are real issues that must actually be tackled. And so what we need is international cooperation, and this is required to enable the transition, particularly to support those with low capacity. If you think about fossil fuel producers in Africa, these are largely poor countries and relatively with low capacity, and where the transition is going to be difficult. So this is something we cannot afford to discount. We want a global just transition. We want a just transition for every country, for every community, for the workers. And we want a transition of energy systems so that the energy system we pursue, and this is a 21st century energy system, must actually help meet our needs. And this continent, and I will come back, I always refer to this fact, is home to 17% of the global population. But we only account for less than 4% of the emissions. And nearly half of our population don't have access to electricity. And these are things that must be dealt with. Otherwise, the solution you end up with is going to be unfair. It's going to actually force our people to bear a cost that they can't afford. And so the equity implications of carbon extraction have to be considered, so that when we call for a just transition, we're calling for transition that actually enables our communities to meet their needs. And then the question around dams, and I think this is critical.
Yes.
We want to say that large dams are not going to meet the social and environmental test. What we need to do is promote the new energy systems of the future, and they must actually enable smart, flexible, diverse, democratized systems. And you can't deliver those through huge dams because of the displacement, and the other social and environmental factors associated with them. And one of the principles I want to actually emphasize is that when we push for an energy system, we must respect the ownership of the people. And these initiatives and solutions must be initiated by the people, must be initiated by the country, and they must be driven by the communities.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ado. As we answer the questions, I want to give or request the panelists to take 30 seconds to answer the question, and then the final word. 30 seconds, because of the interest of time. 30 seconds as you answer the question, and then your final word. Kindly consider time.
In terms of the response, let me just say that there was a question about the carbon footprint of renewable energy. And the best way to look at it is to assess carbon footprint is a life cycle approach, from cradle to grave, as we say it in the sciences. And if you calculate and compare fossil fuels and renewable energy, the gap is really, really wide. You really could say that renewable energies are carbon neutral if you compare them with the carbon footprint of fossil fuels. I think that's a helpful way of looking at it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Annabella? Final thoughts and your answers to the questions raised, Annabelle? It seems we have lost Annabelle. Thuli? Thuli? I think we have also lost Thuli. Thank you, panelists. Because of the interest of time, we will just move on. Thank you so much for taking your time to be with us. And at this moment, I would like to welcome Mr. Prince Papa. Prince Papa is the program coordinator at GCCM Africa, a very, very young man who is so passionate about environmental protection. Welcome, Mr. Papa, for the closing remarks.
Thank you so much, our moderators, Jack Omondi and Loren Chiponda. You've really done so much well and tried to keep within time. And I would like, first of all, to thank all our panelists, Thuli Makama, Annabella Lemo, Mohamed Ado, Dr. Augustine, and also would like to thank Nfongwa Eugene for stepping in for Dr. Augustine, who informed us that he had some emergency he had to attend to. Thank you so much. And what I've realized is that we have a wealth of information, even from our panelists, that having 4 panelists within a time frame of 1 hour 45 minutes is not enough. And remember, this webinar is a series of webinars we will discuss with our panelists. In case for the next episode of this, we have only 2 and leave enough time for them to really exploit all this resource information that they have with our audience. Additionally, I would like to thank the partners who helped us have this wonderful webinar today. First, I would like to thank Mohamed Ado, and on behalf of GCM, I would like to thank PowerShift Africa. Mohamed Ado is the director of PowerShift Africa, and thank you so much for your support. Also, I would like to say thank you to DB Tech Africa, Don Bosco Technical Colleges in Africa, Mr. Jack Omondi. May you pass our gratitude to your organization. Also, I would like to thank the help of Africa Climate Reality Project based in SA. Thank you so much. I would also like to thank our panelist, Annabella Lemo from Justica Ambiental, Mozambique. I will also, great thanks goes to Thuli in absentia, Oil Change International, as well as would like to thank Packager, who have done a great job in helping also to mobilize. And lastly, AXEA, led by Dr. Augustine. We are looking forward to taking this discussion forward with you on how to make this webinar really bigger for the next, within the next 3 or 4 months to come, so that we, whatever has been left said, we could really dive deeper into it. And now I would like to mention a few stuff that are going on in Africa right now. And one is about the proposed East Africa crude oil pipeline passing through Uganda and Tanzania. And so far we have a petition going on, and we would really like to ask you also to promote this petition. It started 2 weeks ago by Avaz. It's hosted on Avaz website, and it calls on Total CEO to stop the madness of investing into this project in Africa. So far, for the past 2 weeks, we are almost at 1 million signatures. I think it's at 900,000, a few hundreds to 1 million signatures. Please pass through. We will also share with attendees of this meeting, webinar, so that you can also append your signature and stop this total madness. 2, we are, as GCCM is a faith-based movement working within the Catholic Church mostly, and we are calling on all Catholic institutions, Catholic churches and organizations to divest from fossil fuels, look where their many are and remove them from there. And in November, we are going to have over 20 institutions announcing their divestment. So if you are a Catholic and you are in this webinar, engage your local priest, a local parish, and any Catholic institution to look, do monitoring of their investment. And if it's tied to any fossil fuel, take action, ask them to divest. And third is a Just Transition webinar on 17th. I think this is next week. This is organized by Europe, and we invite you to also participate. The link is on the website, Season of Creation, and it's going to also highlight ECOP because Total is a European firm investing in Africa. So we are going to have an African also looking at this perspective, why Europeans are now investing in fossil fuels in our country. And a second last, or last but not least, for those who have faith, Christian faith, September 1st to October 4th is called a Season of Creation. We are called upon to look how we relate with nature. How do we treat nature? How do we, for example, the forest, how do we protect it? The animals, how do we protect it? We also ask you to look into the spiritual aspect on how you relate with fellow human beings also. And lastly, just as I said, we will get back to you on how to make the next webinar bigger and stronger. And this marks the end of our webinar today. We are much grateful for your support and help, including our audience who are still there. And this last part of this webinar, the webinar is officially closed, but we are having an animator. GCCM trains prophetic advocates to take care for creation, to say no to these projects like the one in Uganda or the gas industry in Mozambique. So one of the Laudato Si animators is going to read for us a letter from the future. As part of these trainings, we ask you to envision how the future is. And we have Christopher with us here. He's going to read this, but remember, you can step out of the webinar at your own pleasure. The webinar is officially ended. So I invite Chris to kindly go ahead.
Hi, everyone. This is, as Prince said, thank you, Prince. This is a letter from the future addressed to me, which I'm about to share, and I hope you enjoy. It's dated the 26th of August, 2100. Dear Chris, we first met you on that joyous trip to Kenya in October of 2019 when we visited you with our parents. We were 5 years old then. Now, at 86 years old, it's by God's grace that the twins are able to look back. We have such happy memories of that time together. It was our first time outside of Denmark, our first time in Africa. Nairobi was our entry point. Now, 81 years later, there is much we look back on and want to share with you. You had shared with our mom and dad a lot of treasured memorabilia and stories from your childhood, which they in turn shared with us, like the stories of our grandmother, our dad's mom, your aunt, stories of her father, your granddad, our great-granddad, like the one of how you would accompany him as a young boy to Dandora in the environs of present-day Korogocho to buy earthworms. He would use the worms as bait on his fishing trips to Lake Naivasha the following day. You lamented about how over the years, Dandora was to become a dump site, a landfill where Nairobi's garbage was disposed. It mounted to extreme proportions that toxified its valley and river. Equally tragic, the environs were to become a large slum dwelling whose